HRM, we have received numerous requests for the topic of dealing with workplace stress. And while not entirely new with their current state, we've definitely seen an uptick in interest. So today we'd like to focus our discussion on managers because managers are uniquely challenged because they're navigating not only organizational challenges at your agencies, but you also are tasked with kind of assisting employees who are impacted on a personal level with stress.
Yes. So our discussion today is going to cover the following points. We're going to dip into a little bit of causes of workplace stress, a look at what those symptoms might, how they produce themselves in your employees, how stress affects work, what managers might be able to do to prevent harmful stress and how they can support employees, and balancing those performance expectations that you must achieve as well as employee needs. And then we'll dip into a little bit of adjusting to new conditions like telework. We've received some questions from our listeners, and we're excited to include those in our discussion today. We'll address a few of those questions in this discussion, and you may submit additional questions also using the chat feature, and if we have some time permitting at the end, we'll attempt to answer those at the end of the discussion.
Perfect. Yes. And as Shane mentioned, as a housekeeping item, we will be sending an evaluation post presentation. So we invite you. We realize we have such a huge wealth of knowledge and experience with our Team Utah. And if you guys have found management practices that help both you and your teams manage stress, we want to hear about it. So if you can send those ideas our way, we would love to share that with everybody following this webinar. So it is our very sincerest hope that you're not more stressed out following this presentation on workplace stress. We hope we can bring some levity to your day. So with that, let's start with what we're going to do today. So in my conversations with my fellow HR colleagues, it seems like most of the things we're stressing about reside outside of the workplace. So that being said, does it even make sense for managers to be concerned when they have little or no control over everything taking place in the world today?
Yeah, it certainly feels that way, Kelly. Stress is brought about most acutely by life changes, and the ones that studies are indicating that the challenges that are sort of forced upon us are a lot more significant than perhaps stressful things that we take on ourselves of our own doing. When we experience stress, it'll impact all areas of our lives. And since we spend about a third of our waking hours at work, we can expect that stress is going to have a significant impact on the workplace, whether or not the stress originated here. So furthermore, the societal changes that we're experiencing now are affecting our workplaces profoundly. We're experiencing both personal and organizational stress. So yes, a resounding yes, it makes sense to talk about what managers can do to address stress in the workplace.
Great. So managers should definitely be concerned about the stress their employees are experiencing.
Yes, regardless of where stress originates, it's going to affect your employees. It's going to affect your agency's mission as well as the work, and that's what we should probably dive into first. So Kelly, can you share a few examples of how stress affects our agencies?
Sure, absolutely. So first off, it may include a drop in performance, not only at your team level, but at an agency level. There may be a lot of errors that happen in your work. I found that I do this when I start stressing out. I misspell things, and that's definitely a problem when you're a communications person.
Yeah.
So additionally, there's can be wasted time. You may see a lot more passive aggressive behaviors with your employees. And if you've ever worked with a passive aggressive person, I believe that this can be one of the most challenging stressors that you face in the workplace. Furthermore, your employees might be calling in sick more frequently, seeing an increase in their absenteeism. as well as decreased cooperation and collaboration in your meetings. Are they disengaged, non-participatory, not really present?
Yeah, that happens to me. I become sort of detached or preoccupied with competing thoughts when I'm stressed.
So it is imperative, if you see any of your employees exhibiting kind of these behaviors, that you're concerned and you want to address them. So that being said, there are some things you're able to do as a manager and some things that employees must do for themselves. So how can we determine what this distinction is between managers and employees?
True. I mean, we've mentioned a lot of external situations that employees encounter, and that's certainly impacting us, but there are also internal factors like feelings or thoughts and habitual behaviors that can also cause negative stress. So the employee obviously must own these internal factors. And but supervisors can still help here by employing a coaching approach. So effective supervisors obviously get to know their employees well enough to recognize when personal behaviors or patterns might be getting in their way. And recognizing the sources of the distress can help supervisors avoid placing too many stressors at once on the employee, and other times the supervisor may need to bring the pattern to the attention of the employee and encourage them to work through it with honest reassurances.
Yes, so some common sources of internal distress include fears, worries, imagined threats, as well as unrealistic perfectionist expectations, which I'm totally guilty of. From a behavioral perspective, there are certain patterns that can lead to stress, which include overscheduling, lack of assertiveness, and procrastination.
Yeah, and it might be a good mention to say that it would be inappropriate for a supervisor to excuse an employee from feeling any stress by exempting them from challenging assignments. We all have to take on challenging assignments, and supervisors should also avoid taking on the burden themselves. However, on the conversely, undue criticism or disregard for the employee's experiencing of stress is not likely to yield good results either.
Great. So JJ, for many of us, and I think I can speak for quite a few of us, the nature of our work or profession is stressful enough day in and day out. So isn't it normal to expect a certain level of stress? And how can we recognize when stress is becoming unhealthy?
Well, you know, stress isn't all bad. And so, yeah, that's a good point. It might be helpful if we break stress in our discussion of it today into sort of two categories: eustress and distress. And we'll probably spend the bulk of time talking about distress, but I want to mention eustress because it's a positive stress, and it has the following characteristics. It motivates and focuses our energy. In fact, for many of us, it includes challenges that drew us to our job or our career. And you might find yourself very invigorated by these challenges despite them being difficult. And probably the marked difference there is that you perceive it to be within your coping abilities. Typically, eustress is short term. You have an end goal. There's light at the end of the tunnel. It might be project based, or you're trying to, you know, on the running stretch to get something accomplished. And the onset of eustress, when you feel it coming on, it actually improves your performance and brings out your best. And ultimately, an individual experiences eustress as exciting. It's really what makes our lives purposeful. So that's a good thing, right?
That's definitely a good thing. We need to harness that for sure. So one of our listeners asked the question, if I'm not feeling stress, am I in denial?
Yeah. Brain science indicates that we all screen out certain obstacles in our cognition. This is how our brain works to keep us from going crazy. And it may become unhealthy, however, if we actively seek to suppress the feelings that we're having, or to invalidate others' experiences, or draw conclusions without being informed. That said, not everyone experiences the current conditions we're under as stressful. Some people are not as directly affected, and other people thrive with certain challenges just coming at them. As supervisors, we have to be cognizant that too little challenge or removing too many obstacles may actually decrease productivity. So let's shift a little bit and talk about distress, or define distress or negative stress. And it has the following characteristics. It erodes or decreases our performance, and it makes the end goal seem like it's unattainable, maybe unclear. It's perceived as outside of our coping abilities, and it feels unpleasant. Unpleasant to the degree that it evokes our fight or flight response, and ultimately it can lead to physical or emotional health problems too. So not all employees will experience eustress or distress from the same assignments or activities or the same volume of activity. Frequently checking in with your employee might help reveal where they're at with their stress level. And you might find that one element of an activity is the element that's causing the most stress, or you might find that the overall volume is an issue. However, you might also find that an employee needs more challenge in order to feel well balanced. They may actually experience distress from not having enough challenge. So all of those things are factors to keep in balance. Perhaps it would be helpful to explore some of the symptoms of distress. And Kelly, how do I recognize when one of my employees is experiencing distress? I mean, what does it look like?
Sure. I think it's important to note that every person exhibits stress symptoms differently, and we all have very different ways of coping with stress. So I think the most important thing to observe is a sudden change from what is normal with your employee. While some employees may be aware of an unhealthy stress level, others may not recognize it in themselves. So we found this can be especially true in high performers who don't want to disappoint or acknowledge that they've reached their limits. So one of the questions that was submitted was, as an employee, how do I get across that I am overwhelmed without being perceived as weak or unable to just step up and do the job? I don't want to be viewed as a complainer. And I think this is such a great question because it's such a fine line. And I think that we've all experienced that in the jobs that we do. You know, we definitely don't want to be perceived as a complainer, but that's how do we address that? So as managers, when employees bring up concerns about workload or stress levels, please take them seriously. My advice is to ask a ton of questions. So are there agency practices or obstacles that are getting in the way of the employee's ability to get their job done? What's causing them to not put forth their best effort? We can all readily admit it takes a measure of courage to admit when you're having difficulty. So this is also really hard for your high performers who don't let you know when things are getting tough. So in this case, we rely very heavily on supervisors to recognize the symptoms of stress. And JJ, can you highlight some of those for us?
Certainly, yes. Sudden forgetfulness. That's at the top of my list because it happens to me. It can be manifested in a number of ways: missed appointments, neglected tasks, not being able to recall important information. I think we've all seen that happen before, and you wonder, gee, this person is perfectly competent. Why are they just completely spacing this task? That they suddenly get dumb? And it can be frustrating to see some of these symptoms as well, but we're not used to recognizing them as symptoms of stress. Another one is inability to concentrate or focus on completing tasks. Poor decision making. It might be manifested by unusually emotional reactions, belabored logical complexity, or excessive delays in settling on solutions, things like that. Maybe disinterest or lack of motivation towards things that the employee used to find real great satisfaction in achieving or going after. Irritability, signs of fatigue, low energy, sleepiness, maybe expressing anxiety, worry, or fatalistic thinking, and hypersensitive, hypersensitivity to criticism as well. So these are symptoms that are usually easy to spot, but recognizing them as symptoms of stress might be new to some folks.
Absolutely. Well, thanks. So I also want to talk about a little bit about the language that we use to frame stressful events. Throughout COVID, I've noticed, and I've definitely been guilty myself, of using the phrase, when we get through this, or when things get back to normal. Is it healthy to use that language when, in some cases there will be no going back to what our formal normal was? So do we need kind of a reality check on the language?
Yeah, no doubt, right? Nobody really knows. We're in uncharted territory, and most of us are experiencing some measure of grief. We've lost something, and loss creates a great deal of stress. And some of our listeners are probably familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, and one of the stages is denial, and that's often manifested in our language. As managers, the language we use can indeed be a coping mechanism for the grief we might feel over difficult realities at work. And I believe these reassuring phrases that are coming up right now are part of the collective consciousness in our society right now, and we'll likely see it shift in time to reflect our realities. So I think it's vital for a manager to be honest about future prospects of returning to normal, but I wouldn't want to suggest that people beat themselves up or obsess over eliminating these phrases from dialogue. But we all kind of know that we don't really know what the new normal exactly looks like. But certainly do not mislead employees into believing something you know not to be true, or if you really don't know what it's going to be, don't say that you do. We just don't know what the future of normal is, and as more clarity emerges, we will have to reconsider how we describe the future.
Well, the good thing is we're all in this together, I guess.
Right, yes.
It's uncharted, but
Exactly. Now, speaking of denial, it seems like we live in a culture that values stress. I mean, I feel that if our society seems to feed off of stress, it comes at us. I mean, we're all under certain pressures, aren't we? What do I do as a manager if this is just the culture that we're living in?
sure, it's absolutely true. We do live in a culture that values being busy, and stress is kind of that currency that we rely upon. So the busier and more stressed out we are, the more important and valuable we seem. So how many of you have run around all day from meeting to meeting, and when 5 o'clock rolls around, you're absolutely exhausted, but have nothing to show for it? I know I'm definitely guilty of that. So it's important to note, like, being busy is not synonymous with being productive. So just because you have a full schedule and you're rushing from meeting to meeting, it doesn't necessarily equate to a successful day, and that just adds to your stress levels. So as managers, it's kind of easy for us to unknowingly reinforce a stress culture in our teams, in our own agencies, through the language and action that we use. So because of this, I think it's super important, and I would encourage all of you to check in with yourselves. Are you being mission focused at the end of the day? Or are you being busy focused? So, and I know that will vary day to day, obviously, with our workloads. So.
Yeah, that reminds me, a couple years ago, a gentleman by the name of Dan Ponifract wrote an article in Forbes declaring the #1 reason employees say they stopped learning was busyness.
Yes, and I think that's what we hear a lot from our employees. They're so busy that they don't have time to take to learn new skills. So one question that we had submitted was, how do I address the issue of employees saying they are too busy to learn? I have repeated issues of employees receiving training or emails with instructions, and later they come back asking me for that very same information. So, what can I do as a manager to help my employees see the value in continued learning?
Okay, I've got 3 tips that might be helpful. The first tip is look at priority messaging. If a piece of learning is critical, did it get lost in the inbox? Was it grouped, say, with other competing priorities or delivered during a very busy or demanding time? And if so, can any of those conditions be mitigated? Second, I would say look at the complexity. Is this info best conveyed in an email, a live meeting? Maybe it's best conveyed in a job aid like a flow chart or some or infographic or some other way. I'm going to say if it requires more than about 3 steps, consider something more robust than email instruction. Perhaps it only needs a quick huddle to explain, but if it's important, it's worth the time to convey this. Third, remember learning style. Some employees learn best by hearing instructions, and others are visual, and many just learn by doing. So does your instruction align with the employees' learning styles? And another interesting note is that in a Forbes study, half of employees indicated that they prefer to delay learning until the point of need. And at that point, they feel like they could really absorb it best.
Awesome. No, I agree. I think my learning style definitely is I'm a very visual learner. So I think it's always important to take that into consideration, how your employees best learn. So it has been said that today's worker is more stressed than any other time in history. Do you think this is true?
Hmm. Maybe we can wear it as a badge, like most stressed generation. I've often wondered this, but truthfully, this is I guess this is a no-brainer, but this is the only generation that I've lived in. This is the only time I've lived in. And so culturally, if we perceive ourselves as the most stressed worker era in history, I think our perception to some degree is our reality.
Excellent. So, fun fact, according to the World Health Organization, workplace stress is common in situations when employees are being asked to do things that exceed their knowledge, abilities, and coping skills, and when they don't have enough support from their peers and supervisors to be able to close that gap. So, thankfully, this is something managers can do something about. So, we are constantly asking our employees to adapt to new technologies, methods, lots of policies and initiatives. And we as managers, I think it's important to acknowledge that adaptation requires education, practice, and time. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a stressful word.
Tongue tied. Oh my goodness. I'm super stressed out.
So as a manager, Kelly, if my job is to help employees navigate these various challenges that have been tasked with our team or our agency, uh, I'm trying to achieve the desired results. And what can I do to relieve stress, but still keep employees focused on the mission and the results that we're trying to get as a team?
Sure, absolutely. So there are some common stressors in the workplace. The top five of them being career ambiguity, random interruptions, unclear policies, and no sense of direction, a lack of appreciation, and perhaps the greatest stressor is a lack of control. I know that I experienced that for sure. So as a manager, how do we mitigate each of these? So can we start with career ambiguity?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. People. So I think people want to know how they're doing, right, and whether they're meeting expectations. And if you're uncertain about your job, your career, where it's heading, there can be a feeling of helplessness and vulnerability. And if you don't, as a manager, if you don't clearly communicate the objectives and how you think the employee's performance lines up to achieving those, this can be very stressful. and the employee experiences stress just not knowing how well they're doing. So daily or weekly confirmation can reduce stress significantly, and people want to know that their job is secure and what is expected of them. And I think most employees also want to know about career progression and what they need to do to remain relevant and advance. As we often say in human resources, managers who wait until the end of the year to evaluate job performance are about 51 weeks too late. So also keep people informed about like the business situations that are happening when new threats or obstacles emerge. Let folks know. They'll find out indirectly if you don't tell them. So be right up front with everyone. And so, yeah. Kelly, you mentioned also random interruptions. So what can managers do there? I mean, it seems like random interruptions is an individual problem.
Yes. Well, and typically it is up to the individual employee to fix. However, if you as the manager observe it getting in the way of one of your employees' productivity, it is absolutely okay to point it out to them. So the random nature of interruptions can make it difficult for an employee to notice that it's a potential problem. You know, are they hanging out at their coworker's desk for longer than, 5 minutes and chatting about, bantering about what was going on at the weekend. But as a manager, it is possible so as a manager, it is possible that you may be contributing to their interruptions. You may be giving them assignments without expressing priority or deadlines that they need to be achieved by. You can also, employees may interpret random thoughts that you drop on them as not necessarily as important. So becoming more formalized in your approach and giving them some timing and more direction would definitely help the perspective. So at this state, you guys know we are constantly processing, revising, and implementing new policies. So I can guess the solution to unclear policies, but what if we didn't create the policy?
Yeah, I think that's particularly challenging for mid-level managers who are tasked really with interpreting and clarifying policies, right? So if you are unclear, talk to your own supervisor or director to find out, is there latitude? What are the parameters? And if you're able to clearly define those parameters to your team and your employees and decide a direction within acceptable parameters, that's going to be very helpful. You might also wish to seek input from those you supervise. They might be closest to the practical application, right? And clear communication and attention to the mission is essential. And those folks are probably right there in the weeds where they can inform a real solid decision. Consistency is also important. Actions consistent with policy are more important than anything you say about it. So let's talk about appreciation. I've often wondered about this. How often should I express appreciation, and is there a point at which it becomes insincere?
Okay, yay. I'm so excited. This is my favorite topic to discuss. I absolutely love appreciation and gratitude. So in answer to your question, JJ, too much appreciation is rarely a problem. However, if you don't show appreciation to your employees, that could add to their stress level and kind of devalue your future appreciation efforts. So daily, weekly, and monthly appreciation will not only help reduce employee stress, but it also increases productivity and really helps solidify the passion for the work that you guys do. So numerous studies have found that financial incentives or tokens of recognition, while nice, are not necessary, which is awesome because we work on such scaled down budgets here at the state. So that is really good to hear. We found that a simple verbal recognition and appreciation is effective. So I'm a huge fan of handwritten thank you notes. I know that sounds incredibly antiquated, but I
I've
just
received some of those from you. Thank you,
excellent.
Kelly.
Yes, of course. Um, I absolutely adore the thought and sincerity that goes into writing a personal thank you. So I think that acts of appreciation are most effective when they're unexpected and not really part of a formal recognition program. Um, Lastly, I would just like to say, be genuine. Find out what works for you as a manager and tailor that to your personality and kind of the agency that you're in, and be authentic. So employees will know when it's not heartfelt. So a little appreciation sincerely goes a really long way. So with that, I think it's important that we talk about autonomy. So many studies have placed autonomy as the most or one of the most important factors in job satisfaction. So how important is that when it comes to managing stress at work?
Yeah, well, Kelly, this would be my number one. Employees like me are highly stressed when they don't feel like they have control over the participation or the outcome of their work product. So it's important to keep employees apprised of agency priorities, policies, and changes, because then they're able to better respond to those and make decisions themselves. So I believe that savvy managers really know the value of empowering employees to make decisions that are closest to them. When I know when I have been provided complete information, I'm more likely to be equipped to make or recommend solid decisions. And then this in turn provides me with a sense of ownership over what it is that I'm engaged in. Conversely, micromanagement or just withholding vital information will undermine commitment and significantly increase stress. Remember earlier we talked about how most stressful activities are those which are forced upon us rather than self-initiated. If I have the feeling that I am really taking this and initiating something moving forward, I'm likely to experience less stress. So let's pivot a little bit and talk about physical space. Physical space can be a stressor as well, right? Our traditional work locations that most of us are not in right now, that most of us are used to, they were designed to focus on productivity and function, and the visual cues in those spaces almost stimulate a mindset that we've come to expect. So a question I have is, can we really be productive outside of those spaces?
Fantastic. So I think not only can we be productive outside of these spaces, I think we've proven that productivity can increase when we change our work locations. I think the past couple of months of telework for a huge chunk of our employees has solidified that. So I found some interesting data from Global Workplace Analytics. They did a study back in July 2018, and they have found that work from home options have grown by 140% since 2005, which is nearly 10 times faster than the rest of the workforce. So definitely telework is potentially, well into the future. So furthermore, 50% of the US workforce currently utilizes partial telework. So kind of huge, that which is huge, I think. So the telework sweet spot, the data has said, is approximately 2 to 3 days a week. Seems to be a great balance between concentrated work at home and collaborative work at the office. So as we go through this and transition, our work in the next coming months, whatever COVID provides us, I think it'll be interesting to see how we transition our own work teams back into the
Yeah.
office. Sorry.
Right, and the statistics you shared were from 2018. Imagine if they were now.
Right.
I'm imagining that it's even more so, right? So those are all points that support telework, and we have folks who are having a lot of difficulty with telework. In fact, one of our listeners specifically asked about helping employees who are having difficulty adapting to telework. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. I think we all have faced kind of different challenges in that transition. I know I too, Diane, I'm struggling with it. So I'm a very social person, and so while I love my new commute time, it's 0. There is, I think, a potential danger of increased stress because I'm working in the same place I live. So are there different things that we can do to ensure our employees don't burn out at home?
Yeah, yeah. I think folks who have home offices that kind of bear a few similarities to familiar workplaces might adjust more quickly. I know, for instance, when I first started working at home, I was working on the kitchen table, a lot of disruptions, the refrigerator being one of those. And that's just kind of tough. But as we begin to carve out space, there are there's a lot of evidence that employees actually experience greater productivity at home because they find the environment more conducive to focused work than the office. So let's not forget also that some employees are still at the traditional work sites. But
Mhm.
even there, the behaviors and environment has changed. You and I were talking, Kelly, offline about your experience going to the ghost town office and how we have folks who are in that office, but it is far different than what it was, weeks and months ago. So regardless, we are all impacted. It may take some time before we're fully aware of this or how it affects our stress experience with it. But we do have a few recommendations we can share for helping employees be successful managing stress when that might come with just the concept of telework.
Perfect. Yes. So, number one is maintaining a structured schedule. So, I know in theory this seems very easy, but in practice, it is more of a challenge than you think. I tend to be checking my email way more often than I probably would in the off hours at home than I would if I was in the office. So, we encourage you to kind of keep your work schedule as it would be in a normal setting. As a manager, try not to contact your employees outside of their work hours if you wouldn't normally do that. So if meetings are traditionally held at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, please keep that. There's no reason to kind of change that routine and schedule. So I know that employees, there's a temptation to work intermittently, somewhere like if you're putting in 8 hours, but it's between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m., to kind of accommodate your personal schedule as well. And may seem flexible, but in most cases, it's kind of a recipe for burnout. So the employee will constantly think, and no, understandably so, think they're at work all the time. So there's also something fascinating that's come out of this massive work from home transition, which is called window work. It's where employees put in chunks of hours, or rather windows, between hours off to attend to personal matters. So if you're experimenting with this at your agency, just be cognizant of how it affects your productivity and employee morale. The jury's still out on how well this is working for most people. So I'm, for one, am super curious if you guys have experience with this or have implemented it, how well it's going. So
Yeah. A second concept is to stay connected. We've been forced into new communication methods and procedures, and some of them really, have been welcome and long needed. We kind of got a kick in the pants to move forward with some of these when COVID hit. Some managers have tried to replicate the same patterns they had before. This can be really good because it's a recognizable pattern. So let's say, for instance, weekly one-on-ones, team meetings, that are conducted via Google Meet or Zoom or some other method. However, you might have to add a few more check-ins, especially with employees who work best with frequent feedback, those who are more extroverted or require more direction. Social isolation does bear some benefits as well as we typically look at it as a negative, but it has some benefits as well. Because remember those ambush visits when people would drop into your office unexpectedly right when you're in the middle of a productivity flow? Yeah.
I kind of miss those moments, to be honest. All the joys of being in an office. I'd also add, again, going to like a throwback, reaching out via telephone to coworkers who may not be in your reporting structure, but that you used to have conversations with in the office. I do that with one of our employees, Roseanne, and I know like it's so nice to be able to connect with her, and she makes my day every time I get to talk to her. So the next thing we have on our list is care for your body. So I, like JJ, was so delighted to be at home working from my kitchen counter in my cozy little house when this all started. And, 1 month in, fast forward, my back is killing me from being bent over my laptop at my kitchen counter. And, I haven't worked out in weeks because the gyms have all been closed. So as humans, we are born to move and meant to stand, walk, bend, and my personal favorite, dance. It was kind of funny. I worked with a cardiovascular doctor in my past life who equated sitting as the new smoking. So it is absolutely imperative that you get up and get moving. It's a lot harder now, right? We can't pop around the corner to say hi to our coworkers or, go out walking on our lunch hour. I used to do that quite a bit up at the Capitol, and I think it's important. So my advice is definitely take a walk around your neighborhood, take 5 minutes and do some yoga stretches, or, throw on your favorite song and dance around your house. So it will not only give you a dramatic mood boost, but it will also help you decrease stress.
So we mentioned a little bit about the social setting. I mean, work is certainly a social setting, and we know COVID-19 measures have placed us at a social distance from one another. How do you think that's affecting our stress levels?
I think it's absolutely increasing them. One thing we do know about human evolution is that we are dependent on shared brain power. So we are very social creatures who share knowledge and our experiences in order to survive. So, obviously, over the course of history, isolated humans have never done well because we're very social creatures and we're interdependent upon one another and rely upon that social engagement.
Yeah, it reminds me of an exercise I like to conduct in a large open room, and I take everyone in the room has to identify two individuals and place themselves at equal distance between those two individuals. When the whistle is blown, mayhem breaks out because everyone's trying to position themselves in, and as that person moves to get in between two other people, the whole room starts moving. And it really demonstrates or illustrates the interdependence we all have on one another, and the degree of impact that one change can really ripple through an entire social structure. One person moves and 18 other people have to move because of it. So in real life, let's take an example of an employee who's diagnosed with a debilitating condition. I mean, obviously the employee and the immediate family members are radically impacted, but the employee's close colleagues might find that their jobs are affected as workloads are redistributed, major adjustments become necessary, and the employee's supervisor really experiences a great deal of stress, both in terms of the explicit adjustments that need to be made, but also the tacit investment in this employee's humanity. The balance is similar to the exercise I just described. So because we're currently experiencing crises, we can expect to feel stress, I think. It's even if we don't perceive ourselves to be directly impacted by disease, racism, economic pressure, political tumult in our current environment, the social impacts are still affecting us and may surface as stress, whether we recognize it or not.
Yes, I do think we're all feeling a lot of that right now. So do we have any sense of how that is impacting employees currently?
Well, Dana Wilkie is an employee relations expert with the Society of Human Resource Management. And just in April, at the heart of all of this, right, she revealed recent research that found 8 in 10 workers currently feel workplace stress. No surprise, right? A good share of the stress comes from social factors. People feeling disconnected, vulnerable, uncertain about where they stand with their current employer, or even within society at large. This shouldn't really be a surprise since humans are social creatures, as you talked about. But this is experienced by introverts as well as extroverts. So employees are feeling this distance most acutely. They might benefit from more frequent check-ins, reassurances, and other measures to kind of close the social distance loop. So while in-person time may be optimal, we do have technologies that can help immensely. I mean, we're using one right now, right?
Absolutely. So as managers, we do put a lot on ourselves because we're expected to adjust to all of these new realities that we're facing and coping with within our own personal and structural limitations. But we're also kind of tasked with helping our employees cope with the challenges that they're dealing with themselves. So what kind of recommendations can we make to managers to help navigate their own stress?
Yes, I think that's an important piece. I think it's pretty evident that we're in a nationwide leadership crisis. Many leaders are caught like the proverbial deer in the headlights. We haven't been here before. There are immense pressures mounting and emotional, albeit uncompassionate decisions that defy logic and reason seem to be more common than I've ever seen at any other time in my life. So yes, managers need to take care of themselves too. And we've got some resources here, and we will share these resources as well. We'll send these out to you. The American Psychological Association has a site dedicated to stress. There's also an American Institute of Stress. Many corporate training firms have entire programs dedicated to reducing workplace stress. And our own Healthy Utah provides seminars on stress to work groups, and they also have written resources. So PEHP members, except for those on the Consumer Plus plan, have access to a well-respected employee assistance program. Blomquist Hale offers free and confidential assessments, counseling, referrals, follow-up services for members who might have personal or work-related problems with stress and anxiety. And if you would benefit from this service, or you have an employee who might, they may contact them directly, blomquisthale.com. They have also provided to us a very basic information sheet on combating anxiety, stress, and depression. DHRM keeps that on the employee gateway, and there is a link there to that that we'll also share. And that's we'll include that with a follow-up email after the webinar.
Great. Thank you for sharing those. I think that it is absolutely imperative that, people know that there are resources out there that you can get help. And, there's so many different things that you can do to help combat stress, not only for yourself, but for family members as well. So love, love, love those resources. And the folks at Blomquist are just absolutely extraordinary. So interestingly enough, here's a fun infographic that, here are top tips for relieving stress. So find an exercise that you like to do and make it your passion. It doesn't have to be running marathons like mine's ballet bar. I absolutely love it. So make sure you drink lots of water. I know after working in healthcare, that's doctors will preach that for forever and ever. So also diversify your foods. Now's a great time to visit farmers markets and get fresh fruit and vegetables, obviously while social distancing and wearing masks. The hardest thing for me is getting 7 hours of sleep a night. And I know that when you have kiddos and stuff, it is extra hard to get that straight 7 hours. So one other thing that's helpful is make an old-fashioned task list. There's great satisfaction in checking things off as you get them done. So it also helps, I think, kind of alleviate any stress that you might be feeling in that regard. So in tasks.
Yes. I think there's another graphic as well here, how to banish workplace stress.
I love the word banish. Daily meditation. There are so many great apps online that will walk you through kind of between 5 and 30-minute and even longer meditations. I think it's kind of fun to kind of refocus, and you can do that on your break, you know. So release physical tension, get some exercise, use constructive language in every interaction. I think sometimes it's super hard to bring emotion into conversations. So if you can bring constructive language into the conversations with your employees, I think that is absolutely a great way to do that. Set positive intentions, evaluate your coping mechanisms, and lastly, I think super important, be compassionate with yourself and the others that you interact with. We are all doing the very best that we can to navigate a ton of unknowns at this point in time, and just know, like, everybody is in the same boat, and some people may be having a worse day than you are, and being compassionate with them and patience is, I think, one of the best things that you can do. So
thanks. Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I think that concludes our formal discussion. And before I turn things back to Shane, I want to remind everyone not to miss our August 12th off-the-shelf webinar. It's Box, Stock, or Talk, Confidently Holding Challenging Conversations, presented by Dan Chase. Kelly, thank you. It's been fun to discuss and share thoughts and ideas. I hope our listeners have something useful to help them manage workplace stress. And Shane, it looks like we're probably out of time, but if we have questions that have been submitted in the chat, we will certainly include those in and attempt to answer those with some follow-ups. Again, please complete the we call it evaluation. On there, there are 2 questions or 2 requests, and it is, if you have additional questions, to go ahead and submit those. And if you have best practices that you have found in managing workplace stress, we'd love to hear from you and to be able to share those with all of our listeners. We'll compile that and have that ready for all of you. Thank you all for participating and being here today. Shane, back to you.
Thank you, guys.
All right, so I've already sent out the feedback form. If you guys would just fill that out, and then later today I will send out a recorded link to this session, and I'll also have a sign-up sheet for the next session if you can sign up there. Otherwise, there will be another statewide email that comes out where you can sign up at that. Anyway, thank you, and we will see you next time.
Okay, have a stress-free day, everybody.